damage to the president that a Democrat would win the White House? And if so, would that be okay with you?
No, that's not the reason I'm doing this. The reason I'm doing it is because I've thought for 15 years I could start Monday and do that job at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, and I know what I think about everything, which is more than some people do. So I'm sure I'm up to it, and I'd like to try to earn it. Having said all that, the history is that in the last 10 elections, going back to 1952, where there was a sitting president running for re-election, 5 times there was a primary challenge to that president, and all 5 times that president lost the general election. All 5 times. The other 5 times there was no primary challenge, and on all 5 of those occasions the sitting president coasted to re-election. So history suggests that what you say may be true, that a primary challenge to a sitting president could have some impact on the election.
You said that you didn't believe that the president acts in an honorable way. Do you think that the Republicans in Congress should be holding him to account?
Yeah, I think I said I don't think he's serious about his job. It's just another reality TV show for him. Well, there's one Republican, Lindsey Graham, who holds him to account and then praises him in disguise, and then holds him to account and then praises him in disguise. So that's at least one. But I probably have a dozen good friends in the U.S. Senate, and they're the same people they always were. I will say this in response to your question. I am surprised that no one else has raised their hand and said, I don't think the president is really up to this. He's not in the right place.
Are you disappointed then that many of the people that you know and feel you're on the same side with aren't standing up and saying that?
I would just say I'm surprised, and I don't know who it would be, but I would welcome anybody in who wants to come in. I've never ever advised anyone not to run for a political office, because in my view, is the more the merrier, and you never know. Paul Tsongas taught me decades ago, you never know where your next coalition is coming from, and you don't know what the outcomes of the ball may bring, apropos of what you were saying earlier about secondary effects of a candidacy. But I do think that vigorous and open debate is a very good thing for democracy. And, if I had to give you in one sentence why I'm not only animated to do this, but, jet propelled to do at least as much as I've done to this point, it's a concern about the future of democracy in the United States.
Governor Weld, thanks so much for taking the time to talk to us.
Okay, it's a great pleasure. Thank you, Amy.
The Takeaway is supported by Fracture, creating modern photo decor by printing their customers' photos directly on glass. A Fracture is image, frame, and mount all in one. Available in a selection of square and rectangle sizes. Info at fractureme.com/takeaway.
And by Staples, with organization solutions for business including calendars, file folders, banker's boxes, and storage bins. More at Staples stores or staples.com. Staples.
You're listening to The Takeaway at 12:29 on WHYY. Democratic presidential hopeful Jay Inslee is along at 12:40. Inslee, the Democratic governor of Washington State, wants to combat climate change. And among other things, he'll talk about the costs of efforts to do this. Stay close as The Takeaway continues on WHYY.
The University of Pennsylvania supports WHYY. Are you drinking more than you want to? UPenn is conducting a research study of a medication that may help people reduce or stop their drinking. To participate, you must be 18 to 70 and want to reduce or stop your drinking. The study provides a medical evaluation, blood tests, counseling, and monitoring of your drinking. Details at 215-746-1987.
This is The Takeaway with Amy Walter from WNYC and PRI Public Radio International in collaboration with WGBH Radio in Boston.
Well, we just heard from former Massachusetts Governor Bill Weld, who is considering a primary challenge to President Donald Trump. Henry Olsen is a senior fellow at the Ethics and Public Policy Center. It's a conservative think tank. He's also an opinion columnist at the Washington Post. And he thinks Bill Weld or any other moderate Republican considering a challenge to President Trump is on a fool's errand.
Trump is giving most of the party what they want. You can identify national Republicans or separate them into 4 different factions. Fiscal conservatives have gotten tax cut. Social conservatives have gotten judges and religious liberty. Business conservatives have gotten deregulation. And then Trump brought a bunch of blue-collar workers, which I call nationalist conservatives, and they're getting immigration and trade. And of course, there's some overlap between those groups. And that's pretty much about 80% of the Republican voter base, which is also pretty close to what his job is.
And so the people that he lost, you argue, are the 20% who identify themselves as moderates.
That's right. When you take a look at the people who have actually been abandoning the Republican Party in elections, they largely are not people who are former movement conservatives. In fact, the Voter Study Group, a cross-partisan group of pollsters and analysts housed at the Democracy Fund, did a poll after the 2016 election, and they found that the people who voted for Romney in 2012 and Clinton in 2016 were more liberal than any other Republican faction on questions like the Muslim ban or immigration or even social issues or income inequality. All the issues that, not surprisingly, have been at the heart of the debate between the two parties during the Trump administration.
The only announced primary opponent to Donald Trump is Bill Weld, who is a moderate. And then there is talk of other potential moderates challenging the president, whether it's Governor Larry Hogan from Maryland or John Kasich, the former governor of Ohio. How much damage could a primary challenge to the president do to him and his chances in the general election?
I think that if it were a primary challenge that we're able to, say, get 1/3 of the vote in New Hampshire, that would be a signal of weakness. Now, again, not necessarily with the base Republicans, but it would be a signal of weakness among people who he needs to get in November. But it's not clear to me that any of these people are in a position right now to do that. One thing is that so many of these people who were or are disenchanted Republicans will have an opportunity to play in the Democratic primary. And you have to ask yourself, if you're a moderate suburbanite who loved Romney and hates Trump, what are you going to do? You're going to go and throw your vote away for somebody you know isn't going to beat the president, or you're going to go play in the Democratic primary to try and increase the chances that the choice in November is somebody you can live with rather than somebody that you really are uncomfortable with. If that happens, then I think there's virtually no chance that, absent a massive drop in the president's job approval because of recession or Mueller investigation or all the usual suspects, that somebody would get to that point. I think you would get more of the 15 or 20% negative that indicates a small disgruntled rump, but nothing that's really troubling.
We have to do a quick break. More with Henry Olsen in just a moment.
The takeaway is supported by Fracture, creating modern photo decor by printing their customers' photos directly on glass. A Fracture is image, frame, and mount all in one, available in a selection of square and rectangle sizes. Info at fractureme.com/takeaway.
And by Noom, offering a personalized weight loss program that uses psychology and small goals to change habits, with the goal of losing weight and keeping it off for good. Learn more at Noom, Noom.com.
Okay, so we know President Trump's approval ratings among Republicans are strong, from 4 or 5 of those factions of the party that Henry Olsen describes. The weakest link? Moderates, a small but significant voting bloc. And while there may not be enough of these voters to deny Trump the nomination, they will be an important group in the general election. These are the voters who helped deliver suburban, former Republican strongholds to the Democrats in 2018. I asked Henry Olsen if losing these moderates worries him for the future of the GOP.
It worries me quite a bit if I were looking at it as a Republican strategist. That my view is that what I call the Romney coalition, the pre-Trump Republican coalition, was a potential majority in the House, but a loser at the presidential. That his 47% was much stronger in suburbs, but not capable of winning majorities in the Electoral College. And every 4 years it was going to get smaller because of the demographic changes in the country. Trump basically flipped losing coalitions, but made them electorally efficient. He's got his 46 to 47%. But by giving up the suburbs and getting the rural areas, particularly the less diverse rural areas in the upper Midwest and the Northeast, that is a electorally efficient coalition for the Senate. It makes it very difficult for the Democrats to get anything more than the slimmest majorities in the Senate. And it makes it possible to win the Electoral College even in the face of demographic slippage. But it is not a majority, and you can't change the country unless you hold the House too. So my view is that what Trump or Trump's successor needs to do is expand from his 46% to either regain some of those departed people or expand the working class coalition so that includes many more non-whites, moving the Hispanic vote, moving the Asian vote, moving the African American vote from say 7% to 14%. Just that little change would work sea changes throughout the Midwest, because the Democratic Party's chances rest so much on a 90+% high turnout vote.
Is the Republican Party the party of Trump, or is Trump the Republican Party?
I think Trump is a symptom of where the Republican Party and the new additions to the Republican Party was going, that he was very skillful at serving an underserved or unserved market, and consequently got people's enthusiastic support, because this is what they had wanted for years. That you go back and look at polls by groups like Pew, and you can see white working class voters in their beyond red and blue typology very strongly opposing illegal immigration and suspicious of free trade agreements back in 2011. But nobody in the Republican Party wanted to embrace those issues. Donald Trump did. For all of his eccentricities, for all of his problems, for all of his distinct personality, the overwhelming message of Donald Trump is that he is a product of voters' desires rather than a former of voter desires.
And can someone who is not Trump, who doesn't have the personality style of Trump, still engage those white working class voters who felt alienated by previous Republican candidates?
I think it depends on who that person is. The person has to be very clear that in a battle between labor versus capital, labor comes first. That'll be very difficult for a lot of Republicans to do, and those people will disqualify themselves from that. But you can take a look at somebody like Ronald Reagan, who did exactly that. Somebody who could put together the different coalitions of his time, but put the needs of the individual, the working class person, ahead of the need of the businessman or the executive or the entrepreneur. And somebody who can speak that language can be a little less angry and a little more positive, but still convince the white, and I believe non-white working class, that their future is best handled by them. They can place their future in that person's hands. But again, it has to be somebody who's willing to do it. It can't be somebody who reads off of a cue card or reads polls. You know, that's the old time back in the Bush 41 days when Bush was told what he had to project, and he read the cue card aloud. Message, I care. You know, it can't be somebody who's transparently pandering. It has to be somebody who can actually feel it and then convince people with their passion.
Henry Olsen, thanks so much for joining us.
Well, thanks for having me on, Amy. It's always great to talk with you.
Henry Olsen is an opinion columnist at The Washington Post and a senior fellow at the Ethics and Public Policy Center, a conservative think tank.
This is WHYY. Now's the time to think ahead to summer. WHYY's Summer Journalism Program is a 2-week intensive for high school students that provides real-world experience in reporting and producing original news stories. Scholarships are available, but the submission deadline is May 1st. Visit whyy.org/summer for details.
Welcome back to Politics with Amy Walter on The Takeaway. And now a chat with another 2020 hopeful.
I'm Jay Inslee, Governor of the state of Washington.
Jay Inslee spends a lot of time thinking about how to fight climate change.
That makes it hard to make small talk with him about the weather.
It doesn't actually rain here. It's just, it's just the liquid solar power. That's how we think of the rain.
Yeah, okay. I'm not buying it. This month, Jay Inslee declared he's running for president, and climate change is his #1 issue. According to a recent Pew survey, about 67% of Democrats see climate change as a top priority, but only 21% of Republicans feel the same way. I asked Governor Inslee how he plans to bring the country together over an issue that only half the country views as a top priority.
We can be united around a common vision of economic growth, and that's something that ought to unite us all and can unite us all. And what we know is that climate change is a great peril, but it is also a great promise. And it is a great promise of building a clean energy economy with millions of jobs in clean energy that affect so many different parts of our economy and in virtually every region in the United States. And I believe that America is very much a can-do nation. We're very much a group of optimists. We're forward-thinking. We're technological innovators. And when we create a vision where people can participate in that new economy, that can be a very uniting message. During my brief period in the race, that's what I've seen, where people are installing wind turbines in Iowa and solar panels actually in Washington State, and building batteries in Nevada by the thousands for electric cars. So the economy is something that can unite us all. We want all of our children to have both air to breathe and a good job, and this is an issue that can accomplish both of those American visions.
President Obama, Hillary Clinton, a lot of other Democrats also made the same message, that you can have both. Green new jobs are the jobs of the future. Don't worry, manufacturing states or big energy producing states. You're going to have as many or more jobs. But it doesn't seem to have sunk in with voters in those states. So how are you going to be different in making that message than, say, President Obama or other Democrats?
I am the first person in American history to run for president with a very explicit and consistent and colorful message that defeating climate change has to be the #1 priority in the United States. It has to be the first, foremost, and paramount obligation of the next president. And this can't be done as just putting it on your to-do list. It has to be the central organizing principle of the federal government, just as it was in defeating fascism, just like it was going to the moon. And if it is not job one, it won't get done. And I'm saying it has to be job one, and I believe that because I've been working on this for 20 years, co-authored a book about it 11 years ago, helped establish the Sustainable Environment and Energy Coalition, founded the U.S. Climate Alliance with Jerry Brown and Andrew Cuomo. So I've got experience to understand what is necessary, and that is you have to bring your capital to bear. You have to make it a central focus. And that includes removing the filibuster. You have to be willing to bring reform to Washington, D.C. to be able to get that done. And I'm the only candidate saying that as well. So I think my candidacy is unique. I think it matches the moment. Certainly Democrats totally get this. It's the #1 priority, tied with healthcare in the last Iowa Democratic poll.
So that in order to get really significant legislation, climate legislation through, you're arguing you need to get rid of the filibuster, because as long as the filibuster is there, there's no chance of big sweeping legislation passing. Is that your case that you're making?
Anyone who is really serious about tackling climate change, anyone who's actually committed to defeating climate change, has to be willing to say that the filibuster must go. There is no way on this green earth to get those supermajorities to pass meaningful climate change legislation and overcome a filibuster. So I'm outside of D.C. This is why sometimes it's helpful to have somebody from outside Washington, D.C. to go in and reform this antiquated, antediluvian tradition which has prevented progress. Now, there's another reason to do that, which is this is an anti-democratic institution. There's nowhere in the Constitution to say that the people who want positive change get 1 vote and the people who don't want positive change get 1.5 votes. And that's essentially what a filibuster is.
What about using something like the emergency declaration? This president is using it on the border wall. Would you use it for the environment?
Were I to be given the honor to go to the White House, I would want to work with Congress to fashion a very comprehensive mobilization of our efforts to defeat climate change. Now, if the rules change in this country to allow emergency declarations in some extraordinary way, any president would have to respond to that and use whatever tools are available in our democracy. But I believe the old way is the best, which is that Congress has to pass appropriations. We should have democracy where Congress actually has the power of the purse, and we should not allow a president to make the will of Congress.
Point us to your biggest success on the issue of climate change in the state.
Well, our biggest